I thought I'd moved on from my billionaire ex-husband, built my own empire, found my power. But when he walked into that five-star restaurant with his new wife, and saw me dining with the most influential CEO in the city, his face told a story that money can't rewrite. If you've ever wondered what happens when karma meets success and how the tables can completely turn on someone who underestimated you, then you need to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button because this is about to get real. And trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. You know that feeling when life gives you a plot twist so perfect, you couldn't have written it yourself? That's exactly what happened to me last Tuesday night at Leonard Dan in Manhattan. But let me back up a little because this story doesn't start at that restaurant. It starts 3 years ago when I was somebody completely different. 3 years ago, I was married to one of the most successful tech billionaires in the country. Let's call him Jonathan. For 3 years, I played the role of the perfect billionaire's wife. I attended charity galas, smiled for cameras, and slowly watched myself disappear into the background of his incredibly successful life. Don't get me wrong, I loved him, or at least I loved who I thought he was. But here's the thing about being married to someone who thinks they're untouchable. They start to believe that everything good in their life exists because of them, including you. Jonathan made it very clear, especially toward the end of our marriage, that my value was tied to being his wife. When I tried to start my own consulting business, he laughed. Actually laughed. He said, "Honey, why would you need to work? You have everything you could want right here." What he didn't understand was that I didn't just want things. I wanted purpose. I wanted to build something of my own. I wanted to matter in a way that had nothing to do with whose bed I shared or whose arm I hung on at fancy parties. The divorce was brutal, not just emotionally, but in every way that mattered. Jonathan had already moved on with his 25-year-old assistant, of course. How original, right? But during our divorce proceedings, he made sure to remind me exactly what he thought of my potential. "You'll never amount to anything without me," he said during one particularly nasty mediation session. "You think you're going to build some empire? You don't have what it takes. You never did." Those words haunted me for months. Not because I believed them, but because they hurt. Coming from someone who was supposed to love and support me. But you know what? Sometimes the most painful words someone throws at you become the fuel you need to prove them wrong. So that's exactly what I did. I took my divorce settlement, which was substantial. I'll give him that. And I started over, not just with a new apartment or a new wardrobe, but with a completely new vision for my life. I launched a strategic communications firm focusing on crisis management for high-profile clients. Turns out when you've lived through public humiliation and divorce proceedings splashed across business magazines, you develop some pretty valuable insights into managing public image. The first year was hard. Really hard. There were nights I questioned everything, wondering if Jonathan was right about me. But slowly things started to change. I landed my first major client, a tech startup dealing with a databark scandal. Then another and another. Word traveled fast in elite circles about the woman who could make problems disappear and reputations shine again. By year 2, I had a team of 12 and a client roster that would make most PR firms jealous. By year 3, which brings us to last Tuesday, I was preparing to close the biggest deal of my career with one of the most powerful media moguls in the country, which is how I found myself sitting across from Thomas Wellington at Leonard. Thomas owns 3 major television networks, 2 streaming platforms, and enough media influence to shape public opinion on just about anything. We weren't just discussing a contract. We were talking about a partnership that would make my firm the go-to crisis management company for his entire media empire. "Your reputation precedes you," Thomas was saying as we reviewed the contract terms over appetizers. "The way you handled the Senator Williams scandal last month was masterful. You didn't just manage the crisis, you turned it into a comeback story." I smiled, feeling genuinely proud of that particular case. Sometimes the best strategy is to lean into the truth instead of running from it. People respect authenticity even when it's messy. "Exactly why I want to work with you," Thomas said, raising his wine glass. "This partnership is going to be incredibly profitable for both of us. We were deep in conversation about implementation timelines when I noticed a subtle shift in the restaurant's energy. You know how sometimes you can feel someone's presence before you see them? That's what happened. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I had this strange feeling that my past was about to collide with my present in the most dramatic way possible. I looked up from my contract and there he was, Jonathan, walking through the restaurant in his perfectly tailored suit, his hand on the small of his new wife's back, heading straight for a table that had a perfect view of where Thomas and I were sitting. Let me tell you something about moments like these. Time doesn't slow down like they show in movies. Instead, everything speeds up. Your heart starts racing. Your mind starts calculating. And you have about 3 seconds to decide who you're going to be in this moment. I chose to be exactly who I had worked so hard to become. Confident, successful, unbothered. Jonathan's new wife, let's call her Patricia, was exactly what you'd expect. Blonde, young, beautiful in that polished, expensive way that money can buy. She was wearing what I recognized as a custom Valentino dress and enough diamonds to fund a small country. But there was something in her expression as they were seated that told me she wasn't entirely comfortable in this world yet. She kept looking around like she was worried she was doing something wrong. Thomas was still talking about our partnership when I saw Jonathan's head turn in our direction. I watched his face change as he recognized me. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked suspiciously like panic. His eyes moved from me to Thomas, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what this meant. Are you all right? Thomas asked, noticing that my attention had shifted. You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I said, taking a sip of my wine. My ex-husband just walked in with his new wife. Thomas glanced over discreetly, then looked back at me with interest. Jonathan Mitchell, the tech guy. You know him? We've crossed paths in business. Interesting timing. Thomas studied my face carefully. How are you feeling about this unexpected encounter? Honestly, I felt powerful. For the first time since my divorce, seeing Jonathan didn't make me feel small or hurt or angry. It made me feel grateful. Grateful that I wasn't sitting at his table, playing the role of the perfect wife while my own dreams suffocated. Grateful that I was here in my own right, closing deals and building something that belonged entirely to me. I'm feeling like the universe has a sense of humor, I said. And perfect timing. We continued our dinner, but I could feel Jonathan's eyes on me periodically. Every time I laughed at something Thomas said, every time we shook hands over another agreed-upon term, I knew he was watching. And honestly, it felt good. About halfway through the main course, Patricia excused herself to the restroom, and Jonathan saw his opportunity. He walked over to our table with that confident stride. I remembered so well. But something was different. There was a hesitation in his approach that hadn't been there when we were married. Well, this is unexpected, he said, stopping beside our table. Hello, beautiful. The audacity of calling me beautiful as if we were old friends catching up almost made me laugh out loud. Instead, I smiled politely and said, Jonathan, how are you? I'm well, very well. His eyes moved to Thomas and I could see the recognition dawn. Thomas Wellington, right? I followed your work. Impressive media empire you've built. Thomas stood and shook his hand. Ever the gentleman. Jonathan Mitchell. Yes, I know who you are. Your wife speaks very highly of you. The word wife hung in the air for just a moment too long. And I enjoyed watching Jonathan process that Thomas was referring to me as his wife, not Patricia. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear. Jonathan is my ex-husband. Thomas and I are business partners. Business partners, Jonathan repeated, and I could hear the wheels turning. What kind of business? This was the moment I had dreamed about during those hard first months after our divorce. The moment when I could show him exactly what I had amounted to without him. I run a strategic communications firm, I said. We specialize in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation for high-profile clients. Thomas and I are finalizing a partnership that will make us the primary crisis management firm for his entire media network. Jonathan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like respect mixed with regret. That's incredible. Congratulations. Thank you, I said simply. Thomas, bless him, chose this moment to add, your ex-wife is one of the most brilliant strategic minds I've ever worked with. The way she handled the Senator Williams crisis last month was nothing short of genius. This partnership is going to be revolutionary. I watched Jonathan absorb this information, and I could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about me. The woman he had dismissed as someone who would never amount to anything was sitting across from one of the most powerful men in media being praised for her brilliance. I should get back to my table, Jonathan said after a moment. Patricia is probably wondering where I am, but it was good to see you. Really good. You look amazing. Thank you, I said. Enjoy your dinner. As he walked back to his table, I caught Patricia watching us with curious eyes. She said something to him when he sat down, and I saw him shake his head and reach for his wine glass. They had a brief, intense conversation, and I could see her asking questions he clearly didn't want to answer. Thomas waited until Jonathan was out of earshot before speaking. That was handled with remarkable grace, he said. I have to ask, does it feel good? What? Proving him wrong so spectacularly. I thought about his question as I watched Jonathan trying to focus on his conversation with Patricia while clearly being distracted by what he had just learned about my success. Did it feel good? Yes and no. It feels like closure, I said finally. For so long, his voice was in my head, telling me I wasn't capable of building something meaningful on my own. Tonight proved that voice was wrong. More than wrong, Thomas said. You've built something extraordinary, and this is just the beginning. We finished our dinner, talking through the final details of our partnership. The contract was officially signed over dessert, sealing a deal that would change my business forever. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Jonathan and Patricia were still at their table, but their conversation looked tense. She kept glancing over at us, and he kept trying to redirect her attention back to him. Thomas walked me out of the restaurant, and as we waited for our cars, he said something that surprised me. You know, I've been in business for 30 years, and I've learned that the most successful people are often those who have been underestimated. They have something to prove, and that makes them unstoppable. Is that why you wanted to work with me? I asked. Partly, he admitted, but mostly because you're exceptional at what you do. The fact that you've overcome being underestimated just makes you more valuable. My car arrived first, and as the driver opened the door for me, I looked back at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see Jonathan and Patricia at their table. She was clearly upset about something, gesturing with her hands while he tried to calm her down. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, not jealousy, but maybe pity. He had everything money could buy, but he had traded away something real for something that looked perfect. On the surface. As my car pulled away from the restaurant, I reflected on how different my life was now compared to 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I would have been the one sitting across from Jonathan, probably not even included in any real conversation about his business. I would have been decorative, supportive, but ultimately invisible in any meaningful way. Now, I was driving away from the biggest business deal of my career, having just proven to the man who said I'd never amount to anything that I had built, something he couldn't touch or diminish. But here's the thing that surprised me most. His opinion didn't matter anymore. Not really. The validation I had been seeking wasn't about proving Jonathan wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. The success, the business, the partnership with Thomas. None of that was about Jonathan. It was about me discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's version of perfect. That night, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the signed contract, I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who was so afraid of disappointing her husband that she stopped dreaming her own dreams. The one who made herself smaller so he could feel bigger. The one who believed that her value was tied to someone else's success. I thought about Jonathan, too. And surprisingly, I felt grateful to him. Not for the way he treated me, but for the way his treatment forced me to find my own strength. If he had supported my dreams from the beginning, I might never have discovered what I was truly capable of on my own. 3 months later, my partnership with Thomas had transformed my business beyond my wildest expectations. We were handling crisis management for major celebrities, politicians, and corporations. My team had grown to 30 employees, and we had just opened a second office in Los Angeles. I heard through mutual friends that Jonathan and Patricia had gotten married in a lavish ceremony in the Hamptons. The same friends mentioned that Patricia had been asking questions about me, apparently curious about the ex-wife who had managed to impress her new husband so completely during that chance encounter at the restaurant. But their story wasn't my story anymore. My story was about building something meaningful, working with incredible people like Thomas, and finally understanding that my worth had never been determined by who I was married to or what anyone else thought of my potential. Sometimes I think about that moment in the restaurant when Jonathan realized what I had become. Not because I wanted his approval, but because it represented something bigger. It represented the moment when someone who had been made to feel small stepped fully into her power. The best part, this is just the beginning. Every day I wake up excited about what I'm building, who I'm becoming, and what's possible when you stop limiting yourself to other people's expectations. That feeling, that sense of unlimited potential is worth more than any validation from someone who couldn't see your worth when it mattered. And that honestly is the real victory. Sometimes life has a way of showing people exactly what they lost. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments about a time when you proved someone wrong about your potential. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about turning setbacks into comebacks. Your support means everything. And remember, your worth was never determined by who stayed or left. Until next time, keep rising.